Hello, everyone. This is Rose Horowitz. I am a Pulitzer-nominated journalist and the founder of Women to Follow. Thank you for joining me tonight. I'm thrilled to host episode number 30 with my guest, Maeve DuVally, a journalist, author, and LGBTQ plus advocate. For Women's History Month, in case you didn't know it, I was sort of all over social media with it. I launched a new initiative, Women to Follow Summit, with 10 women from around the world. So honored for you to join us. Shout out to my producer, Stefan Kaplan, Spin It Social on Twitter. And please join us on Facebook under Rose Horowitz and Women to Follow, Twitter under Women to Follow, LinkedIn, and on my Women to Follow YouTube channel. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. It would mean a lot to me. And tell us where you're watching from. Tune in. We'd love to hear from you. Let me tell you a little more about my guest, and then we'll bring her on. Maeve and I will talk about her journey, personally and professionally, about coming out trans at Goldman Sachs and her battle for sobriety. She writes movingly about her childhood, her work as a journalist, her time in Japan, her family, and her work in her soon-to-be published memoir, Maeve Rising, Coming Out Trans in Corporate America. Twice divorced, Maeve DuVally has 3 children. Her journey of coming out at Goldman Sachs was profiled in the New York Times. She has spent the bulk of her career as a journalist and corporate spokesperson. She was a managing director of corporate communications at Goldman Sachs until June 2022. Prior to that, she worked in media relations at Merrill Lynch. She's fluent in Japanese and has worked in Tokyo, Washington, D.C., and New York. Since she came out as trans 4 years ago, Maeve has been an LGBTQ plus advocate and public speaker. Please follow her on LinkedIn and tell us where you're watching from. Welcome, Maeve.
Hi, Rose. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Thanks so much. It was great to meet you. I attended the Girl Scouts of Greater New York Gala on behalf of Digimentors, a group that I work with, and Maeve was one of the honorees, and she spoke really powerfully of her journey.
Yeah, that was a really special evening for me. I've gotten to do a lot of interesting things in the last 4 years, but that really ranks high. It was a really special evening.
And what was so special about it? There was something you said, but I won't say it. You know, you said you had been a scout.
Yeah, I said I had belonged to the other scouts, but tonight I'm a Girl Scout, and that was nice. And you know, the other thing I really liked, the Girl Scouts of Greater New York. Actually, instead of having me speak, I suggested I wanted to be interviewed by a Girl Scout, and they were able to find a non-binary Girl Scout to interview me, and that just made the interview even more special for me.
That's great. Yeah, you. One of the things you said was, and I guess one of my, in talking and reading your book, I didn't get through the whole thing, but almost. I guess one of my first questions is, what would you say is the primary message that you're trying to communicate in the book, in your memoir?
Yeah, it's a book about coming out at in my personal life and at Goldman Sachs, but it's also a book about recovery. I was an active alcoholic for much of my life. I would not be where I am today without recovery. And it's just what's possible for a human being who finds themselves in a difficult situation. And it's also about the whole process of self-discovery and self-actualization. And I will make this point I can make this point in more detail a little bit later, but
Mhm.
what is a transition? It's finding out who you are and then trying to live as you believe you are and how you want to be. And I would just throw out there that I don't think that's different than any human experience. I think almost every human being on this planet is trying to do that. So I don't see how we're that different than everybody else.
Okay. I think that was one of the things you said at this dinner that, I think everyone could identify with. And I think that's an important message, to share with people who think of other people as other, right? Instead of
Exactly.
everybody on this journey of self-discovery.
Yep.
How did you come to write the book? Why and how did you write the book?
So I've always wanted to write, and through the years, I've written a novel. I think I tried my hand previously at a memoir, but it never really worked. And in part of it was I was doing it while I was actively abusing alcohol. So it's really tough to get things done when that's happening. And it's no coincidence that in the same year I realized I was transgender in 2018. The same year I got sober in 2018 that I realized I was transgender. And I started writing the book soon afterwards. I put it aside and then I picked it up again last year. And I think I was able to produce something that does a good job approximating my life.
And in reading your book, you go back and forth, and there's a lot of chapters that you talk about Japan and your time in Japan. How was Japan influential in your journey, I guess, because it is a big part of the book?
Sure. I have 3 children, and one of them was born in Japan, but the other two, I tell them to go abroad. I think when you're young, it's just very eye-opening to go abroad and experience new things and change your perspective. And Japan I was there essentially during my 20s, so it was at a very important time in my life. And I'm not the person, I wouldn't be the person I am today without my experience in Japan. What else Japan represented for me was my coming out story is a little bit different than other trans people. I did not know consciously that I was transgender for most of my life. I knew I didn't like myself. I knew I didn't like anything masculine about myself. I knew I felt an affinity for women. And in addition to that, during my time in Japan, I experimented a little bit with my looks. I became more androgynous. I used makeup, and sometimes I'd wear dresses. And I think Japan was a time for me when the part of me that knew I was transgender kind of
Mhm.
bubbled up to the surface, but it didn't quite come out. And I had to wait another 30 years for that to happen. So and a book is very, very interesting. Writing a memoir and looking at your life is
Mhm.
very interesting because the farther away you move from the events, the more panoramically you can see them. So you tend to see your life differently than you did maybe at an earlier stage in your life.
Mm. Now, well, I guess as someone who was in Japan on a U.S. journalism exchange program for almost a month, it was really interesting to read, and I was highlighting some of the places that I had been to.
Mm.
But there is an androgyny, I think, about the culture in a way there, even though it is, you know, uh, you'd think it isn't at all, but there is sort of that, and that a layer of that, I think. at least then.
Yeah, in terms of the outward appearance, that's very accepted, and it's been accepted historically in Japan.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
to be transgender, I think each country's different.
Right.
Japan, there's a lot more ignorance, and I use the word ignorance neutrally, about transgender issues in Japan than there is, say, here or in Europe. Of course,
Hmm.
the US has its own problems, and I think we'll probably get to those relatively soon.
Okay. How did when you started to this process at Goldman Sachs? I think we can get there later, but your personal coming out, with your family. But when you started professionally, Goldman Sachs, I guess you were in charge of corporate communications,
I
and there
wasn't in
was
charge. I was a senior person in the department.
okay, all
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
okay. Uh, And how did it come to be that the New York Times reporter, Emily Flitter, came to profile you as you were going through this process and coming out officially?
Sure. So I came out, I had this realization that I was transgender in October of 2018, and I came out immediately in my social life. Not
Hmm.
quite yet to my family. That took another couple months or so. But for
Hmm.
whatever reason, I wasn't comfortable yet coming out at Goldman Sachs. It's that in when you're not comfortable coming out, what does that mean? It means you're worried that you will not be accepted, and
Mm.
everybody wants to be accepted. And that's the problem with the environment right now, is that we are not accepted by a whole bunch of people in this country, and that's a real problem. But so there were about 7 months I was not out at work, and we decided at Goldman Sachs, once I did want to come out, that uh, we had to tell people in advance that my name was going to be changing, my appearance was going to be changing, how people should refer to me was going to change. So we kind of drew up lists, and I let a lot of the people I work with internally at Goldman Sachs know in advance that I was coming out. But for me, the most important external constituency I work with is journalists. So I had to tell the journalists. I didn't have to, but it's really best practice, so
Hmm.
people aren't surprised. So in advance of coming out in May of 2019, I told a lot of the journalists I work very closely with that this was going on in my life. And of course, journalists being journalists, we knew that somebody might decide to write a story. And lo and behold, Emily Flitter at the New York Times decided to profile my coming out, and she shadowed me at work
Hmm.
for my first 3 days of
Okay.
being out.
Okay. And what impact did that story have? What happened as a result of that story? And I think you wrote, and I read it online, but you wrote in your memoir that on the Sunday when you went to see it in the paper, it was in your photo, and the story was on the top, the front page of the business section.
Yeah, it's funny because yeah, it was that photo on the screen. It's funny because in our world, in the world of journalists and PR people, we these days everything's minute by minute, and we all focus on the online version coming out. And the online version of the story came out on a Friday, and I completely forgot about the paper. And somebody told me, you should see the photo of you. So I went and got 10 copies of the paper, and I have them stored away in my closet. But yeah, it it was, I first of all, I think the New York Times did an amazing job on the story. The editors and Emily Flitter, they dealt with my coming out very gracefully, and they just handled the difficult parts of the story very well, and I'm grateful to them for that. Um, the interesting thing, which I did not expect, was as a result of that story, I had a lot of people in various stages of coming out, transgender people in various stages of coming out in corporate America, who identified with my story and wanted to talk to me about my story. So as a result of that story, I've been able to connect with a lot of transgender people and hopefully mentor them and give them good advice. Incidentally, just as I was mentored and given good advice before I decided to come out, there were a half dozen transgender people who really helped me prepare, and I feel like we have an obligation by receiving that gift from them. We have a responsibility to give that gift away to the next group of people coming up behind us. So as a result of that, I realized that I could really be of service to the transgender community, particularly people in corporate America or college and graduate students thinking about coming into corporate America. And in that, quite frankly, has changed my life.
And how has that changed? I want to go back to your more personal story, but how is that, being a mentor for people who are trans and coming out, how is that, how do you see that? Because you worked at Goldman Sachs until 2022. So tell us a little about what you're doing now and how that is shaped by that.
I'm on the boards of 3 LGBTQ plus nonprofits. And in addition to GLAD, I'm on the board of an organization called Trans New York and an organization called Anchor Health Initiative, which is a LGBTQ plus healthcare provider in Connecticut. And in addition to that, I mentor people. I do consulting on diversity and inclusion. So, much of how I spend my time is giving back to the LGBTQ plus community. And, I wasn't able to do that when I was working at Goldman Sachs to the extent I can right now. And I really enjoyed my time at Goldman Sachs and I learned so much, but this is where I need to be at this point in my life.
Okay. And where do you see yourself? How do you see that continuing, or with this book coming out, do you see another book coming out?
Yeah. So I wrote the book. I do some public speaking. I do diversity and inclusion consulting, and I just like to do more of that. I actually started a novel. It has a transgender main character, but it's fiction, and hopefully I can get a good ways through that this year. And I want to use any recognition or publicity I get from this book. I want to use it to give back to the community, because you know what? I'm very privileged compared to a lot of transgender people. I'm white. I worked at Goldman Sachs, and I live in the Chelsea section of New York City, which anyone who knows New York City, that is possibly the best place in the world to be an out transgender person. And unfortunately, the vast majority of my transgender brothers and sisters do not live in as accepting places as that. And today, right now, I'm doing this interview from Provincetown, which is even more accepting. This is a place, Provincetown in Massachusetts, at the tip of Cape Cod. This is a place where one of the few places in this country where LGBTQ plus people outnumber cisgender, non-transgender people and straight people. So this is a refuge for me, but I can't stay here forever. I need to get out into the world and see if I can help.
What are some of the questions, do you get, how do you handle, one of the most difficult people, group is are trans women, Black trans women. Do you get any special requests from them, or are you getting involved with groups like that?
Yeah, I mentor some Black transgender women, and their issues are different from mine. So some of the issues are economic. It can be, insurance covers some aspects of a physical transformation, and I'll take the time out here to just make clear that while physical transition is very important to us and it makes us feel better about ourselves, it's really the internal part of the transition which really makes us feel good. And so yeah, the problems are different, and but you know, at the core, we're really the same. And I learn a lot from everybody I work with, and I just want to pull everybody up and just make our community stronger.
What are some of the questions when you get approached by a corporation? Like, I think you're, I'm thinking, trying to think, what corporation? Oh, you're on the Knight Bagot Fellowship, which is through Columbia University, and you were a fellow yourself. You know,
Yes.
what kinds of ways do they, specifically, do they ask your guidance? Can
So
you explain that?
yeah, there's a couple of things. Like allyship is really important. It's always been important, but a lot of corporations want to want me to talk about what it means to be a good ally. And I would say this year it's more important than ever to be a good ally because our community is under attack by politicians in this country. And there's not that many of us. By some accounts, in my generation, 1 in 200 people are transgender. The
Mhm.
numbers are quite a bit higher in some of the younger generations, and that gives me a lot of solace and optimism going forward. Because I'm going off message here a little bit, if that's okay.
That's
Um,
okay.
but that gives me a lot of hope for two reasons. One, of all the people that supposedly don't like transgender people, you can divide them into two categories. It's the people that always aren't going to like us, the people that are full of hate, don't accept, don't tolerate, and then there's the people who just don't know transgender people and they just think it's weird. Well, those people are in play. If they know transgender people, then we have a shot at changing how they think about us. And the fact that there are so many more people in younger generations that are transgender, I think that's going to have a positive impact. And you know what? All those young people are going to vote, and we can hopefully throw these rotten politicians who are really torturing us out.
Okay. Um, that, I guess, the political is what I wanted to get to.
Okay, I already got there. Yeah.
Yeah. The New York Times did a story, and the headline was something like, it was really a roundup of different state laws, that have been passing
Yeah.
transgender,
Yeah.
right, laws against transgender and various,
Mm.
you know, different things, right?
Yeah.
But all
Yeah.
aimed at that.
Youth health care. Bathroom bills are back in play, unfortunately. Drag shows. Yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah, and I even read one. I'm trying to remember which state it was, but there was a graduation, I guess, like last Friday, and they brought the case to court that the that the student in question could not wear boys' clothing.
Yep.
So something
Yeah.
like that. So what the article talks about is how conservatives are using the transgender, as a political issue, that they found, after the Supreme Court made same-sex marriage legal, that the GOP didn't find as much support as they had traditionally from, conservatives for about same sex. So they did some surveys and found that there was more, support for, more support to uh, for this backlash against transgender rights. So what the Times article said is, what has struck somewhat unexpectedly is the issue of transgender identity, particularly among young people. Today, the effort to restrict transgender rights has supplanted same-sex marriage as an animating issue for social conservatives at a pace that has stunned political leaders across the spectrum. It has reinvigorated a network of conservative groups, increasing fundraising, and set the agenda in school boards and state legislatures. And the Texas Tribune has been also writing about this. So what are you, is there anything you see, you think that this will just turn out to be a non-issue, or, what are people in your community doing to combat this?
No, it's not a non-issue. It's frankly despicable what's going on right now. And I think a portion of those politicians who are going after trans rights, they would literally like to erase us as a whole group of people. And we know from history that what happens there. History does not look kindly on groups of people that try to erase other groups of people. And at some point, this craziness is going to stop, but I don't know how long it's going to go on. We have there's whole organizations, LGBTQ plus organizations that challenge these bills legally. There's organizations that lobby these legislatures, and I talked about allyship, but particularly, we're coming up on Pride Month, and Pride Month is important because it's a time where usually LGBTQ plus issues and rights are given more attention than they normally do. So it's essential for everyone in our community and every ally in our community to tell these people they need to stop. It's not right what they're doing.
Okay. And there have been, there are other groups like the ACLU and,
Yep.
that
They've
have
been
stepped up.
Yep.
Okay. And the things like gay pride, marches, do you find there's more allies as, the years go on in those marches?
I haven't been out very long, so I haven't been to too many marches. I think this year is going to be my third one, maybe. But the one in New York's it's wild. Yeah. And, there's all kinds of people dressed in all different ways from our community there. And there's all kinds of allies, both marching in the parade. I think the Girl Scouts of Greater New York, which we talked about earlier, I think they're going to march in the parade. And there's a lot of allies on the sideline. And at least in New York, it's really just a celebration of our community, and it's wonderful to see. And that's true in other parts of the United States, but sadly not all parts of the United States.
Yeah. And when before you came out and as you were, so the timeline, the time sequence here, it took you becoming sober, right? And
Yep.
And how long after that did you come to this realization that you were
About
trans?
9 months. About 9 months.
9 months. And how did that start happening? Your book talks a little bit about wanting to wear pink lipstick or,
it's with me. And, every trans person has a different coming out experience. There's no kind of cookie cutter trans coming out experience. And, mine started with, we talked about the Knight Badgett program that I was a fellow for, and I'm currently on the board of Knight Badgett, but they hold a fundraiser in October every year. And in October of 2018, for me, it started with this voice in my head that said, I'd worn makeup before, wear makeup again. And, it was a corporate setting. I didn't really know why I did it. But I'm a very introspective person. So over the course of the next week, I explored that and challenged it. And I quickly, my consciousness, it bubbled up from my consciousness. And I realized that I had wanted to be a woman all my life, and I wanted to be an out transgender person. And that all happened within the course of a week. And once I had that realization, I I've moved pretty quickly. Yeah.
I think you quoted somebody saying, slow down. And I think your comment to that was Maeve is unstoppable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So many people are joining us. Jeanette Ashworth, who is teaches Important Advocacy and Leadership by Maeve DuVally. Great interview, Rose. So thank you, Jeanette, for joining us. Paula is saying hello from Tallahassee. Thank you, Paula. Brett Manuel is joining us from Ottawa, Canada. And Ariaga, greetings from Long Island, New York. Glad you are sharing your platform. Stefan Caggiano, thanks so much. He's giving a fire emoji. And Tim Sohn, greetings from Shahola, Pennsylvania. So thanks everybody for tuning in. And it's great to have so many people welcoming Maeve to the show. Stefan. This born and bred, my producer says, this born and bred New Yorker never misses the New York City Pride Day parade, one of the best days of the year to support Pride. And you'll have to watch. I hope you follow him on social media because he posts some amazing photos. His background is he's a photographer. Jeanette Ashworth is saying, I'm very moved by this interview. I counsel some transgender clients and have a transgender family member as well. How did you approach this when, so you had what were the clues? Because in reading your book, I guess one of the things I noticed was that you said during these times, during Halloween in Japan and other times, you always like to dress as a girl. Like, I think one time you dressed as a cheerleader in Japan. When you were introspective, did those kinds of things come into play? And I think you also have talked about how you hated, your bodily hair always, it wasn't.
Yeah. So yes, for Halloween, I typically dressed up as a woman. I didn't really think anything of it. I hated myself all my life, but I thought that was kind of general self-hatred and there was nothing I could do about it. I hated everything masculine about my appearance. But again, I thought there was nothing I could do about it. And, I didn't really like a lot of the men in my family, and I gravitated towards the women. And, these things, I just didn't think about them. That's the way it was. And once I realized I was transgender, and I actually, writing the book also was very cathartic for me and allowed me to view my life a little bit differently than I did as I was experiencing it. So, everything really makes sense to me right now. And it didn't before.
And when it didn't make sense, do you think, what do you think of why you were using alcohol and maybe at times you were using drugs as well? What was that about as you look back?
Part of it was I was a very unhappy, depressed person, and I used alcohol to self-medicate. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, we now know that, like, when you're depressed, pouring alcohol on it is like the worst thing you can do because alcohol is such a depressant. Mm-hmm. So, you can look at it from many levels. I believe I received an alcoholic gene as well. I have a lot of alcoholism in my family, but I also do think that the idea of being transgender was always in me, and on some level I knew it, but and on some level I didn't like it, and continuing to pour alcohol on these things about myself that I didn't like, made them more tolerable, made them faint. I didn't hear these voices in my head that I've heard all my life telling me I was less than. So alcohol, in recovery, we talk about alcohol. Alcohol actually is not the problem. Like, I'm the problem. alcohol is the solution and it
Mm.
works at first, but if you do it long enough and you do it in excess long enough, it really messes you up.
And did you have to reach, a real low for you to really decide, for you to really change, to go through with the sobriety?
Yeah, beginning in 2014, I had a series of bottoms that were progressively worse. And the last bottom that I had in January of 2018, I tried to kill myself. So, like, I'm out of shots and I need to stay sober. I intend to stay sober. And, in retrospect, I think for me, not every alcoholic has to go this far, but I really had to go to the brink because I was really a defiant and stubborn alcoholic. I drank for a really long time and I had to go to the brink and realize that I did want to live. And if I wanted to live, I couldn't drink. And if I wasn't going to drink, I had to find a program, a way of recovery that would keep me sober.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your candor and being honest. Uh, Much appreciated. And I'm sure
Yeah,
that,
and I think we need to talk about this more because alcoholism and drug addiction are much more common in the trans community and the broader LGBTQ plus community than in the cisgender and straight population. So
Mhm.
um, I actually consider my sweet spot the type of people I love. I love helping everybody, but the type of people that are right up my alley are like alcoholic transgender people. Like, if you're alcoholic and transgender and you need some help, give me a call.
You heard it here. Yeah. So thank you. Thank you. Yeah. That's, uh, as someone who knows it, you can help people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's given my life a purpose that it didn't have before. And, I consider appearing on shows like this one, and thank you again for giving me the opportunity. It's a chance to educate, number one. And I talked about we need allies. So how do you get allies? You help educate allies. So we need allies, but also you never know who's dialing in from the audience. I'll tell you, in April of 2018, I came out at work in May of 2018. In April of 2018, Goldman Sachs held a panel with 3 transgender people,
Yeah.
and they talked about um, how to make workplaces more welcoming for transgender people. And I'll tell you, when I saw those 3 happy, confident transgender people, I decided on the spot I wanted to come out. So, sometimes people just need to hear the message at the right time. So you never know who's going to be in the audience.
Yeah. And I guess people have to be open, to hearing these things because, even if you're not trans, you should listen to the people that are, because, and companies should do those kinds of events because you never know who's going to be listening, like you were listening because I think you had been very resistant. You had come out in your personal life and you sort of would spend time in the bathroom before you left Goldman Sachs. And then to change for your, like I think I quoted you, Clark Kent, you Clark Kent in the office, and then you became Wonder Woman. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that was kind of a crazy routine, and I found it exciting because, for 7 months I was going in a suit, and then on the way out of work, I'd stop in 2 different bathrooms on the way out and partly change in one, then partly change in the other. And it was kind of exciting at first, but it quickly got pretty old. And, this past weekend, I one of my sons graduated from college, and I went to his college graduation. And he's fortunate enough to go to University of Vermont in Burlington, Vermont, and it's a very, very liberal city. And I remember hugging him, and he completely accepted me. And I looked around as I always do because in some places it's dangerous for transgender people, and that's such a liberal place. Nobody really cared. It was so validating to have that experience there.
That's great. We have a few questions. I just want to, let's see. Jeanette Ashworth is saying, do you have any ideas or suggestions about ways to reassure transgender people who are filled with anxiety about the state of the country?
Well, we have to band together. I don't have any kind of magic that I can pull out of my sleeve that's going to make it better for people. There's a lot of transgender people and transgender youth in states that are passing, really horrible laws. And as I said earlier, this isn't going to last forever, but that's a small assurance right now when you really, these transgender youth, they need medical care. They're going to go crazy. Suicide rates are really high in our community. People need this, and they're being deprived of it. I think one of the most important things we can do now is just band together. When you're alone with your fears, they get magnified in your head. So our community needs to band together and talk to each other, support each other. Allies have to be involved, and hopefully with that sense of community, that will help get us through these really dark times until hopefully better times come.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a really troubling time. Carol King asks, what thoughts can you share on the case of Florida and other states? This is sort of what we're talking about, in other states pursuing a similar rollback of gay and trans rights as well as civil rights overall.
Yeah, as I said earlier, I think some of the states, Florida included, are trying to erase us as a people. And comments to that effect have been made, and it's really bad. And some of us up here in the Northeast, where we're in a really good position, right? And right now, the really safe places to be out and transgender on the West Coast, the Northeast, Illinois, and there's a few other states, but there's a whole swath of our country where it's transgender youth health is not legal anymore, and our community just has to keep working to change that. And I think as I said earlier, it really changes when we educate that part of the population that hopefully is open-minded to transgender people. And we need to get the electorate big enough where we can vote these purveyors of hate and intolerance out of office. We need to throw them out with the ballot box. So everyone needs to vote. Like, everyone in our community who's of age needs to vote. Our allies need to vote, and we need to get rid of these politicians.
Okay. Everyone needs to vote. Everybody hear that? There we go. I guess, how's the allyship been from the medical community? I had been part of a show where we did a show called She's on Call, where we did different medical issues, and we had the American Academy of Pediatrics, head with us. Have they been supportive of?
Yes, very supportive, because the entire there's a whole body excuse me, of evidence that for people who are transgender, a physical transition is absolutely essential. It's an established medical fact that if you deprive transgender people of this, you are going to harm them. So the medical community's been extremely supportive. They've argued in the favor of transgender medical care, and we appreciate their support, and we need it.
Okay, well, good to know. I just wanted to make that clear here. Let's see. Jeanette Ashworth, some people ponder moving to safer countries. Glad to see there are sanctuary states. And
Yeah,
she's saying Washington.
I think some people, quite frankly, are going to move to other states where it's more acceptable. But
Hmm.
I don't think everybody should have to. Some of these states are homes to people, and they've been homes to families for a long time.
Hmm.
And I can understand. It's easy for me to say, sitting up here in Provincetown in New York City, like Florida's a bad state. Why don't you leave? But people live there. They have community, family, friends.
Hmm.
It's moving's not for everybody. We need to get these laws that are on the books rolled back.
Yeah, and I guess we need people in those states to fight them, right? 'Cause
Yes, we
you
do.
can't
We
fight them
do.
from only the Northeast, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
yeah, or California. When you did come out, how did you do that? How did you tell your ex-wives? I think you have one daughter from your marriage in Japan,
Yeah.
and then two sons from a woman when you lived in Westchester.
Yep. Um, my daughter is 34, so she's a little bit older. So I just told her, and she was very accepting. Um, with my family, my second wife and my two children, I made the mistake of partly dressing as a woman, wearing some makeup and some women's clothing, and I wasn't quite ready to tell them, and assuming that they wouldn't notice, but of course they noticed, and that didn't work out well for me because I wanted to determine the time and the place in which I shared this with them, because it's, for children. And although I was already divorced from my second wife, we're very close now. I wanted to tell them when I was ready to, and they figured it out even before. So, as we say in the PR profession, I lost control of the narrative,
Mm.
and it was a little bit uncomfortable for a while, but over time, we were able to iron out the problems. And I'll tell you, for my extended family, I grew up in Massachusetts. Um, they've all been very accepting, and I'm not sure they understand all the ramifications of being transgender, but they know I was a very unhappy person for most of my life, and
Mm.
that I never smiled. I say this in the book, but from the time I was 10 until I came out, maybe um, for a period of nearly 45 years, I never looked at myself in the mirror. I just couldn't do it. And so I smile now. There's photos of me actually smiling. I can look myself in the mirror, so they know I'm happy, so they know this is right for me.
That's really powerful part of your story. Because to think, you didn't smile from the time you were 10 until you were 58 when you came out, then
Yeah,
that's a very long time not to be happy and not to want to smile and look
it
at
certainly
yourself.
is.
Yeah.
It certainly is.
Uh, I guess one of the things I always ask my guests is to name three women to follow. The woman to follow started as a trend when I named, woman to follow, and everybody started naming their own. So let's look at your woman to follow, Maeve.
So my first woman to follow is Sarah McBride. She's an out transgender woman, a state senator in Delaware. I think she's one of the most senior out transgender politicians in this country. And incidentally, I talked about that panel in April of 2018. She was one of the people on that panel. She hadn't yet been elected to the state Senate in Delaware, but she was on that panel, and she really inspires me.
Great, thank you. I've heard her speak. She's very powerful.
Jamie Lee Curtis is just a cool person to begin with, but Jamie Lee Curtis has an out transgender daughter, and Jamie Lee Curtis epitomizes what an ally should be. She's completely supportive of her daughter. She uses her platform as a very famous actress to speak out for transgender rights. I'm just in awe of her allyship.
Great. Thank you.
Kathy Mitsui was a former colleague of mine. She's left Goldman Sachs. She was our chief economist in Japan, and we talked about Japan. I have affinity for Japan. But Kathy Mitsui coined this term womenomics, and Japan is behind other industrialized countries in terms of female workforce participation. And Kathy Matsui made the case economically that developing policies that bring more women into the workplace in Japan is not just good social policy, it's good economically for Japan. And she came up with models that showed if Japan was able to get this many more women into the workforce, it would have this impact on the economy. So I've just always been very impressed with Kathy, and she's a great woman to follow.
Thank you. I will share that information with my community, and thank you so much for such a great woman to follow. They all sound amazing. And I did start I have various women to follow lists. I have some general ones, and then when I see there's a need for naming more women to follow in particular areas. Like I started one for Ukraine so that people would know there are women experts on Ukraine and women in Japan, in Ukraine. I have one for abortion, and I've started one for LGBTQ plus. So
yeah, let's add to that. I'll help you.
Yeah, okay, we will. So let me ask you where you see yourself. I'll ask you two questions. One, where do you see yourself in 5 years? What will you be doing?
Sure. I hope I'm doing just more of the same. I hope I will have published some more books. I hope people still want to listen to what I have to say and hire me as a public speaker. I think I'm at the stage in my life where I need to get out there and speak more publicly about the awful political things that are happening in this country. So I do travel a bit, and once my book comes out, I expect to travel more. So I want to get out and get out also to places where it's difficult for transgender people, because I want to show my support.
Okay, that sounds like a noble goal in 5 years. I think we've put in Stefan has put in a link. It's available at Amazon. I saw it's also, of course, available through Barnes and Noble. The book is Maeve Rising, Coming Out Trans in Corporate America. The publisher is Sibylline Press. I think they are a new publisher that's publishing women's work.
Yeah, it's interesting, Rose. It's
okay.
Women's work, but it's women authors over 50.
Okay.
That's kind of cool, right?
Yeah, that's kind of definitely cool. I think one of the things we haven't tackled in this country is ageism and we're getting some readers, listeners. Thank you, Maeve. Thank you, Rose. Meaningful show. Grateful. Thank you. Thank you, Jeanette. Thank you. If there was one message you have for our audience, or a message you have for youth who are, think that they're transgender, what would that be?
Well, I want to go back a little bit to everybody talks about the differences. I want to go back to what's the same. And, first of all, I don't think I look very threatening. I'm not threatening to anybody. I just want to live my life as I am, and I want to be accepted. That's all I want. That's all most of us want, whether you're transgender, gay, straight, cis. So that's point number one. And then point number two is the point I made earlier about self-discovery and self-actualization, we're just doing what everybody else is doing. So let us do it and get on with our lives. We're not going to bother you. Just let us do it and accept us.
Okay. Accept us. Those are wise words. And I really appreciate your candor today and telling us your story and being so open. I think it's a powerful way to share. You know, it's powerful. What you're doing is everything is made more poignant and meaningful when people share their stories. So
again, thank you for having me, Rose. It
thank you.
Was a really enlightening conversation. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Maeve. If you can I'm just going to close out, and if you just want to wait for me backstage,
Sure.
that would be great. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Well, that was really a wonderful discussion. I think it was really, you know, when I sometimes have to be at an event or I see something on the news or read somebody that's really powerful, I you know, note it down and I follow them. And Maeve is not active on Twitter or Instagram, but she is active on LinkedIn. So, and she has several posts about going to GLAAD dinner and going to the Girl Scouts of Greater New York gala that she attended and what that meant to her. So please follow her, and you know, let's be open to her ideas. And like she said, you know, we're all discovering ourselves, and then that's a universal. So rather than looking at the differences, you know, try to look at the universals. Let's see, some comment. Carol King as the most memorable moment in our conversation. They're trying to erase us. As journalists and defenders of democracy, we must lead the discussion and the civic understanding needed to ensure greater rights going forward across the country. Thank you, Carol. Thank you for watching. Carol's a journalist, radio, news journal, radio and print. Until we all of us are free, none of us are free. Thank you, Carol. So I will be back soon with another Woman to Follow show. If you go to I hope you will follow me on my YouTube channel. There are highlights on my Twitter feed of the summit I did, which looked at various women in different parts of the world, looked at entrepreneurs, and also looked at Web3. So I'm continuing to explore those things. And if you have interesting women for me to follow, then please name them. And I really appreciate your listening to the show and honored that you could all be here. Thank you so much. See you next time.